Hey everybody, today we have a 63 Shasta Astrodome, and we're going to use this as our test pilot to show you about axles and trailers, a very crucial point in getting coast to coast across the nation in your vintage camper. The bottom line is, as we well know, all these trailers are getting old, things are going to start failing. The crucial point you do not want to fail is your axle in one of these campers. As I well know from picking up across the United States, whenever you have a bearing fail, it's bad. You don't want to be on the side of the road. So we're going to help you today, and we're going to explain a little bit about changing axles. But first we're going to start what this axle has. So this one is an original axle. It's a 5-lug in here. As you can see, the 5 studs. This one's a threaded on cap. Now, I picked this trailer up in Canada back in the day. It was the second trailer I ever bought, and I'll never forget bringing this back home. I had to pack the bearings, of course, because it's sitting a long time. I had new tires and wheels, and I pulled over when I found a good spot that wasn't on the top of the mountain to actually change this stuff out. I tried to get the lugs off, but my hands were so cold. It was 12 degrees outside. I just couldn't. There was snow everywhere, so I thought, I'm going to find a little shop. So I found a little automotive shop. I went in and said, hey, I've got 2 wheels and tires. Can you pop them on there for me? Can you pack the wheel bearings for me? They said, no problem. So I went down, had some lunch, come back about 3 hours later, expecting it to be done. Of course, sitting outside, snow on top of the trailer. As you can well imagine, they hadn't even touched it yet. So I go inside, ask them if I could help them. I said, hey, I just need a little heat. Can I pull this inside and knock it out real quick? They had 3 or 4 bays empty. Of course, they said no. No big deal. They pulled it right in, though, after I talked to them. And I'm sitting there in the glass window as they're working on it. The first thing I see them do is take a flathead screwdriver and a hammer trying to knock that cap off. Well, as you well know, or you may not know, these are a threaded cap and it screws in, so he ruined the cap on it right off the bat. Now, what that does is that keeps all the grease from coming out after you pack the wheel bearings. So he says to me, hey, no problem, we'll just call Napa, we'll get you another cap. Well, you can't get one of those caps at Napa anymore. They haven't been made, since the 60s. So the bottom line was, all the way home, I had to add grease to that to keep the axle from going out, and it was horrible. Grease was everywhere. It was a nightmare. The bottom line is, we don't want you having that kind of problem. We want to save you from these kind of issues. Or when I was coming back from the 100th anniversary rally back in 19, our 64 Shasta Astrodome, I packed the wheel bearings in it, and coming back, we had one fail. Well, the bottom line was, the spindle was ruined. There was nothing we could do about it. Hattiesburg, Mississippi, as you can well imagine, it was a bad time. We had to have it towed 1 mile to a repair facility. It cost me $2,200 on a flatbed to have that trailer towed. Now, the bottom line was, there was nothing I could do. I could come back and get it with a trailer, but I really didn't have time. So I found a guy. He said, you could put an axle. I said, no problem. Just don't go any lower. Well, the bottom line was, when I sent the drivers to go pick up after he said it was done, it was actually 4 inches lower. He had changed the axle and not even listened to what I said. By the time the driver got 60 miles out, he already had 2 blowouts because the tires were rubbing the inner fender. He already ripped off some of the jacks and done damage to the black and gray tanks I just added to it. So the bottom line is, there's a lot of crucial factors involved in this that a lot of people don't understand. And a lot of people that do trailers don't understand this because it's a vintage camper. They get caught up in the everyday brand new stuff, and they really don't understand, like that cap, what goes on. So we want to bring you into 2024. We want to show you what's going on, and we want to explain it to you so you have the knowledge. I understand a lot of people cannot do this stuff at their leisure with all kinds of money in the world. You may not be rich. You may not be able to just go pay somebody to have this done, so you may have to do it yourself. Or you may want to know what you're talking about when you go in to have an axle swap. So I'm going to explain a few things for you. So when you go in to have an axle built for you, they build these by hand, and the bottom line is, they ask a bunch of questions. One thing they're going to ask is, what is the bolt pattern? So we have a bolt pattern checker here. This one is 4 to 8 lug. Most campers are going to be anywhere from 4 to 6 lug, you're going to see. But this is a great tool to have, and this is easy to use. So we can see this is a 5 lug, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to put that on there, and we're going to get the bolt pattern. Now, we go 5 lug and we go over. It's 5 on 4.5, which is a very common trailer bolt pattern. Now we want to double check our wheels that this is going into. Same, 5 on 4.5. So the bottom line is, this wheel will bolt up to that hub. So that's the crucial question that they ask that for. They want to say, will that wheel bolt up to that? So you have to give them that information. If it's a 4-lug, you go to the 4-lug. If it's a 5-lug, go to 5-lug, 6-lug, and that kind of thing. Don't always assume. You know, I had a lady call me one time on a Lighthouse duplex. She was going to pick it up, and she says, what is the bolt pattern on there so I can get some tires and wheels, have the tires already mounted and have that ready when I get there, and what is the diameter of the hitch, you know? And so the coupler on that, I told her the size. Well, it was different. Somebody had cut it off and changed it. The bolt pattern, they had changed it from a 6-lug to a 5-lug, and she was highly upset, you know, because she couldn't hook up to it, and she couldn't put the wheels on that she brought. So don't always assume that going off Google or, you know, looking it up will be the correct. You always want to check this stuff. And I'm going to show you a few more things. So first off we have is the bolt pattern. I just showed you that. That's done. One other thing they're going to say is, what's the hub face? That's very important. That's how the wheel is going to sit on there, and I want to show you how to get that. The hub face is where the wheel actually bolts up from the hub to the hub. So where it bolts up, we have 65 on that from end to end. That's the figure they're going to ask you for. From hub face to hub face is 65. Now, we have bolt pattern, we have hub face. Now they're going to ask, what is the spring center? And basically, these things equate out to just like what they sound. We're going to show you how to measure that. Now, on an axle, you have where the spring sits right there, and you have the center of it, as we can see. There's two different ways to measure it. You can either measure it from spring center to spring center, or if you're up underneath one of these, which I always am, I will measure it from end to beginning, which will give you the same number. And that may be confusing, so I'm going to do it one more time. They're going to ask you what spring center is to spring center. You see that bolt? We're going to go to the center of the bolt, center to center. Or if you're up underneath there and you're upside down, you're in the dirt, you can just grab it and go from the beginning to the end, right there. That'll give you the same number. So either way, two different ways to get the same result. Have a little trick. Now, another thing they're going to ask you is, do you want an idler axle, which is what that is, or do you want a brake axle, which is what that one is? That actually has the brakes inside of it. Now, that all has many different factors to equate out. You may want a brake axle because you go through a lot of mountains. You may want a brake axle just because you have a bigger trailer. You may want a brake axle because your vehicle's smaller, you want more control over it. A lot of different factors go into this. This one we haul with a 1/2 ton to a 1 ton. We really didn't care, so we just got an idler. But if you wanted brakes, you can get a brake. And with that comes electric brakes. It has a magnet inside of that drum that when you have your controller inside of your truck, it will actuate, send power back there, and it makes the magnet push out, which extends the brakes to stop your trailer. So that's one of the other questions. So we're going to start off with the bolt pattern. We went over that. Then we went over hub face to hub face. And then we went over spring center to spring center. And then went over idler, which means no brakes, or brakes. Those are all questions they're going to ask you. Going up and down and all around, it doesn't get real confusing if you just stick to the basics. One other question they're going to ask you is, do you want a drop axle, which is what this is. You see this axle literally drops down, and that will give you 4 inches right there where it drops it down, so it's going to be lower. If you want it higher, you would get a straight axle where the hub and the spindle is bolted right to there. So, and that will raise it 4 inches. So a drop axle, if you have, if you look at it like this, will lower it 4 inches. If you have a straight axle, that's going to be 4 inches up, basically. So drop is 4 inches down. Straight axle will be 4 inches up from there. It depends which one you have and where you want to sit it and how you want to do it. That factor comes into play in many different ways. And what I want to talk about with that is the Shasta reissues had a recall back in 15 and 16 where the trailers were too low and the tire was bottoming out into the inner fender. Now what would happen was the tire would rub and actually break the inner fender and cause the fender to have damage, and it could have a blowout. I've seen many that came in, they were wore down from the rubber. We don't want that, so they actually had a recall and they took off the drop axle and they put on a straight axle, which raised it up 4 inches. Now, that does many things. That's going to mess up your step because it's going to be taller. Your jacks aren't going to hit correctly because they're going to be taller. And then it's going to have a little bit more sway because it's going to be taller, and the wind's going to get underneath it. But they want it to be safe for when they load it down so it wasn't bottoming out and taking out the inner fenders. That's a lot of factors to be involved. One reason we want to take the time and actually measure the hub face correctly by pulling the wheels off and getting the spring center measured correctly, like we talked about, is where that tire is going to sit and where the spring's going to sit. If you don't have the spring center correctly up underneath there, it's not going to bolt up. You won't be able to get the axle to go under there. If you don't have the hub face correctly, you can either have the wheel too far out where it rubs the outside of the fender, or too far in where it rubs the inside of the fender. And you don't want that because that axle is useless at that point to you. When they make these custom, you have to have precise measurements. And it's not that hard to do if you take your time and do it correctly. I understand it sounds like a lot, but it's not. So we're going to go back over this one more time. We have different bolt patterns, and you would measure your wheel that you're going to use or put back on the vehicle. So we did that. That's 5 on 4.5, which means 5 studs in there, and a 4.5 bolt pattern where it bolts up. Then we can tell them how we want that axle built, so that wheel will bolt up to that hub. Then we talked about hub face. That's where that wheel is going to sit, and we showed you how to get that from end to end. Then we talked about spring center, which is where your springs are going to sit, and we gave them that measurement. Then we talked about either going a idler, which means no brakes, or a brake axle, which means it has brakes. And then we talked about either a straight axle or a drop axle. Drop axle is going to be lower, straight axle is going to be higher. So you have to equate all that out. A few more things that go into this. When you buy a new axle, you always need to buy new U-bolts. You want to get the new bolts to hold on the spring. And I would recommend new springs also. We see a lot of cracked springs. We see a lot of broken U-bolts in these. It's always the weakest link, and you don't want that. You want to make sure you're safe. Another factor going into this is the lug nuts. Now, the lug nuts from the factory on your older trailer is going to be a lot smaller, wore out, could be cross-thread. You don't know what's going to be on there. Always spend the money getting new lug nuts. Now, one thing about the lug nuts is when you put all this stuff on brand new, they need to be retorqued within 50 miles, just the initial 50 miles. We have seen wheels come off of brand new trailers, and a lot of the new ones will have a placard. It'll be right on the side. It'll say retorque lugs in so many miles. They do that for a reason. A lot of the aluminum wheels are porous, and when you crank down on them, they still have a little bit of give in them, and after about 100 to 120 miles, we've seen them actually come off. Steel wheels, not so bad, but it's a good rule of thumb just to tighten them all after 50 miles. That's the bottom line on that. So the different things we went over will save you from having an axle that's unusable when you order it, or help you in ordering it and talking to a shop that's going to help you in saying, hey, I want it up a little bit, or I want it down a little bit. Giving them these different things and letting them know which one you want if you take it into a shop, or if you're ordering it, will make sure you get the correct and proper thing that you're needing to get your trailer from coast to coast. And it makes it so much nicer if you do have an issue where you can go and get a bearing, at Tractor Supply from these new parts. Or if you need a hub, I mean, literally, you can pick up one of these hubs, bring any major town, compared to a vintage trailer bearing or a vintage trailer hub or even an axle. It's bad. You can't hardly get that stuff anywhere anymore, which is why you want to upgrade to new. The one last thing I want to talk about is easy lubes. So, these newer axles that we are buying have an easy lube system, which means the spindle is drilled and it allows grease to go front to back. Also, the seal in these for the easy lube is a lot thicker. So what it does, it takes the grease when you pump it in the zerk there, all the way to the back, it drives it into the rear, pushes it back out the front, so you can literally flush the grease out, make sure that the new high temp grease that you're putting in there is bright red, it's all clean, you can wipe that off and then go about your business. And what that does, that saves you from having to pull the whole system apart and hand pack all that stuff like we did back in the day. So that saves a lot of time, and like I say, having these newer systems on here allows you to do it a lot quicker than what we used to. Many different factors come into play in that. We say about every year or every 12,000 miles. Just all depends what you're towing, how far and how hard you're going, how many campouts you go. It's really hard to gauge because I know some people that go coast to coast 7 or 8 times a year. When changing out an axle, safety is key. It's number one. Always make sure you have some good sized jack stands to put this thing up in the air so you're not crawling underneath there, you know, on a whim and a prayer, or a jack. I've seen a lot of people use a jack for their only support. Well, these jacks have pistons in them that fail. I've seen that happen many, many times, and that jack will let down on you, and it could cause some major pain. We don't want any issues like that, especially when you're going to be crawling up underneath one of these trailers. And then, like I say, if you're going to do it, go ahead and do it right. You know, make sure that the springs are getting changed. Make sure the shackles are getting changed. You know, make sure that when you're putting in the axle, you're doing everything, including the lug nuts. A lot of these older wheels, the lug nuts are so small, they won't even bolt up to these new studs. Way different size. And of course, you never want to put anything old back on here like that. It's way better just to do it and have a good, you know, safe base of mind when you're going down the highway. You don't have to worry about things like that. We have enough worries driving or having a vintage camper. We want to make sure it's safe, it's getting us from point A to point B with no issues, and it's easy maintenance. And that's why we're recommending these new Easy Lube axles. Like I say, I can't stress enough, having the parts available just about anywhere you go is key to this, you know, because then they can replace something very quickly if you do have an issue or something does fail. Between you and the road, you only have a few things, and that's why it's so crucial to have a good axle on there, good tires, good bearings, you know, good wheels, and that kind of thing. But the one thing that we want to crucially think about is making sure these are kept lubed at least once a year every 12,000 miles with these new Easy Lube. Just like you're hand packing the old ones, we want to make sure that's kept done on this and make sure the grease is flushed out and it's kept clean. The grease guns aren't that much, guys. You can get one from Harbor Freight for probably 20 bucks, and a tube of grease, 6 to 10 bucks. The high temp red is what we use. If you really want to be fancy or do a lot of trailers like we do, you can get a DeWalt grease gun. They're about 180 bucks. It's automatic. You just got to flick a trigger and it goes. You don't have to squeeze it like you do the old school ones, which is really nice. That's what we use here at the shop. That's very crucial in keeping all these trailers on the road and keeping them lubed. It's one thing that nobody thinks about. I get a lot of new ones in here. We're talking 2021s, 2022s. They haven't even lubed their wheels at all, you know, and we'll get in there, they'll be bone dry. So it's just something people overlook, and I don't see a lot of new axles under these vintage trailers, but I highly recommend it. We're taking our Lighthouse, you know, 25 states a year, and we're traveling to California and Florida and Oklahoma and Kansas and all over the place, Detroit, Michigan. You know, we have a peace of mind going down the highway that we know that we're good and we don't have any issues, and that's one thing you definitely want in this. So the bottom line that I would recommend is upgrade your axle if you haven't. Figure out what you need. If you have any questions or you need to know something, give us a call here at American RV. We're more than willing to go over this stuff with you because we know everybody can't afford to take it to a shop and have it done. If you want to do it yourself or you just have some questions that you want to ask me, I'll be more than happy to go over it. We can get you the right size, the right height. We can get you there and where you need to be going down the highway. And that's the bottom line, guys. We want to be safe. We thank you for watching our video and have a great day.